We can expect Christian Hackenberg's legacy at Penn State not to be measured in championships and wins. Basically, what he and Bill O'Brien did in resuscitating a program that was in a difficult situation and maintaining respectability within the Big Ten and winning ball games and getting to two bowl games consecutively. Looking ahead at the quarterback situation, we bring in Nick Polak from Black Shoe Diaries to help us sort out the situation post Hackenberg. Nick, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so Trace McSorley, we got to see him against Georgia. Penn State fans didn't want to see him. Hackenberg's absence may have cost you the ball game. McSorley came in. I watched the game gun to gun. He looked a bit overwhelmed early. Then in the fourth quarter, he led a couple touchdown drives. And the one TD pass in particular, he really threaded the needle and let it loose. 14 of 27 with a couple touchdown passes and 142 through the air in the loss to Georgia. Your thoughts about McSorley coming into a redshirt or a sophomore season, actually?
So I think overall, I wasn't terribly impressed with what I saw from McSorley in the bowl game. But it is also important to remember that it is a bowl game, and you really can't draw a ton of conclusions from a bowl game because there's just so many factors into it, like whether or not seniors or kids headed off to the draft are really into the game or just worried about staying healthy and things like that. So I don't want to draw too many conclusions from the bowl game, but I wasn't terribly impressed with what I saw. Granted, it's a tough situation, obviously, not expecting to play I'm sure he's expecting to play a little bit at the end, possibly, but definitely not expecting to play as much of the game as he did. So considering that, I think he performed admirably. But overall, I wasn't terribly impressed with what I saw. It was pretty clear that the Georgia defense didn't feel like they needed to allocate that many resources to stopping him. He wasn't much of a threat on the ground, which was kind of one of his big calling cards. His accuracy was shaky pretty much any time it went past 7 or 8 yards. So, I mean, granted, he did get better as the game went on. That one touchdown pass was a beauty, the one where he threaded the needle right up the middle of the field through at least 3 defenders. That was a beautiful pass, but I don't know. It wasn't necessarily the most inspiring performance personally that I would have imagined as far as a potential future starting quarterback. But I think he did okay for himself. I'd be much more interested to see him against maybe a Big Ten opponent or early on in the season when everyone's kind of getting their legs going, as opposed to just him getting started in his first game when everyone else is playing in their 13th game of the year.
So needless to say, Nick, I believe we've got a quarterback competition on our hands at Penn State for the first time in a few years. We talked a little bit before we came on. We got Tony Stevens out of Indianapolis in the mix, along with Jake Zenbeck, #1 rated player coming out of the state of New York.
Yeah, so I am a huge Tommy Stevens fan. I think he is the best option to start at quarterback this season. He's, like you said, come from Indianapolis, was originally committed to Indiana. Penn State managed to flip him after Brandon Wimbush ended up flipping from Penn State to Notre Dame. So he's been in the system for a year now. Even in just the one year's time where he got to just get used to a college weight training program and all that, he grew something like 2 more inches and he put on like 30 pounds of good weight. And so he's a big kid. He's not going to be easy to bring down, whether in a open field tackling sense, if he takes off and runs with the ball, and he's not going to be an easy kid to sack either. He doesn't have the greatest arm strength in the world, but it's gotten better. And as far as we've seen from Joe Moorhead's offenses up at UMass, they don't necessarily acquire a quarterback who can sling the ball with a Christian Hackenberg arm strength. It's more about accuracy than anything else. So I think that he's definitely a front runner for the starting job early on. And then Jake Zenbeck is another really interesting name. I think the main thing holding him back from being the starter this year is just inexperience and a lack of a good weight training program, because as you said, he was the #1 player in New York, but it was New York, and it wasn't even like New York City. He was playing in upstate New York. So it's not the greatest competition up there. I never really had to become this huge bulked up kid to really succeed and dominate. And not that you really need that to play quarterback, but he definitely does need to get bigger and stronger. But he's a very, very interesting player. He's a great athlete. He's much more athletic than he gets credit for. And while he's listed as a pro-style player, he definitely has the ability to tuck and run when he needs to. So what he brings to the table is potentially really interesting and actually seems like possibly even like the ideal kind of quarterback to play in Joe Moorhead's system. So while I don't think he'll earn the starting job right away, I think he could be a real threat to take over next year, of course, depending on what Trace McSorley or Tommy Stevens do this year, whoever wins the job there.
And so much of the success of the quarterback goes back to the offensive line for any team, but specifically based on what we've seen out of Penn State in the last few years and trying to rebuild the offensive line and having to go with a lot of spare parts on the defensive side and elsewhere, as you know much better than I do. Penn State, just a few days away from spring practice, blue and white game on April 16th. What would be the good news out of spring practice concerning the quarterback situation for you? What would you like to see and hear?
I think the best news I could hear from spring practice would be, number one, no injuries, obviously. And then secondly, I think the best thing that could happen at this stage would be to hear that it's still a strong competition, because I don't think that any of the three guys are far enough ahead of the other one that any of them will really be able to step out and step up in the spring and really take hold of that job right away. And if one of them does, to me, that sounds more like the other two are struggling rather than one is really succeeding and outplaying the other one. So I'd like to hear that it's still a strong competition. They're still all working hard. So I prefer them to come to a decision more in the fall, if only for just game planning purposes for opposing teams even. So yeah, I would just like to hear that it's still a strong competition.
And on a side note, Nick, before we let you go, I heard Christian Hackenberg interviewed at the Combine. Interesting situation for him. He's always been much heralded even before he stepped on the field, considering who was coaching him and his enormous talent. The NFL talk already surrounded him in his freshman season, and he's been since kind of forgotten because of a subpar sophomore season. He kind of rebounded this year, but didn't light the world on fire. Obviously, the offensive line didn't help out. But he seems to be extremely confident about what he can do at the next level.
Yeah, so the one thing about Christian Hackenberg is that even before the whole combine process started, Penn State fans pretty much knew that. I mean, I know personally I'd be shocked if he fell out of the first round, because the things that the NFL is always going to look for and always going to take a chance on are big arms, good pedigree, good size, and tests well and interviews well. And Christian Hackenberg's proven time and time again that he knows all the right things to say. He is a very bright mind. So he has everything an NFL team wants. The accuracy definitely has taken a step back throughout his college time, but a lot of that is just shell shock syndrome, just from being hit so many times behind that offensive line. So I'm not saying that Bill O'Brien will take him in the first round. I don't think that's a foregone conclusion at all whatsoever, especially because the Texans have plenty of other needs as well. But I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see a team, maybe a team even like the Steelers, a team with a quarterback that is going to still be in place for a few more years, take Hackenberg, knowing that he'll have a few years to learn. He won't need to step in right away. So I think he's still got a good NFL future ahead of him.
Nick Polak from Black Shoe Diaries on the Penn State platform for SB Nation, and joining us to help us break down the Penn State quarterback situation with spring practice just a few days away, and the post-Christian Hackenberg situation at the most important position on the field. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.